The scent of damp wood and drying sumi ink hung heavy in the air, a permanent perfume in the modest house tucked away in a quiet lane of Meiji-era Kyoto. Outside, the city hummed with the friction of old and new, the clatter of rickshaws on stone, the distant cry of a vendor, the hushed rustle of silk kimonos. Inside, however, there was mostly silence, broken only by the scrape of Kenji's carving tool against cherry wood or the soft, almost invisible sighs of his wife Hana. Kenji, an ukiyo-e artist in his early 30s, was a man consumed. His eyes, usually intense and focused, now held a frantic, shadowed quality. They darted across the woodblock before him, searching for a line, an essence, that perpetually eluded him. His fingers, stained a permanent grey-black, trembled slightly, not from cold, but from a gnawing frustration that coiled deep in his gut. He was chasing ghosts, the ghost of a dying art form in a rapidly modernizing Japan, the ghost of recognition that always seemed just beyond his grasp, and the ghost of a perfect, ephemeral beauty he could visualize but never capture. Hana watched him from the doorway, her own quiet beauty dimmed by worry. She remembered the fire in his eyes when they first married, his passion for the floating world Prince infectious. Now, that fire had become a fever, burning away everything else, their meagre savings, his health, the simple warmth that had once existed between them. He barely saw her anymore, a figure moving in the periphery, ensuring tea was warm, meals were served, the inkstone replenished. Tonight the rice felt cold in her stomach as she observed his hunched shoulders, the discarded imperfect prints crumpled like fallen leaves around his workspace. His latest attempt, a depiction of willows drooping over the Kamo River, lay abandoned, the lines stiff, lacking the soul he desperately sought. "The ink gospodin is drying on the stone, Kenji-san," she murmured, her voice soft, tentative. He flinched, startled, as if pulled from a deep trance. "Ah, yes, thank you, Hana." His gaze flickered towards her, unfocused, before returning to the offending woodblock. He saw the willow, but not the woman who spoke. He saw the failure, but not the gentle concern in her eyes. The weight of unsold prints pressed down on them. Whispers followed Hana in the market. Kenji-san, such talent, but lost. Perhaps the old ways are finished. Her own family hinted delicately at her husband finding more practical work. But Kenji clung to his art with the tenacity of a drowning man, convinced that a single masterpiece, one perfect image capturing the painful transience of beauty, would change everything. It was this conviction, hardening into obsession, that led him down paths Hana could only dimly sense and deeply feared. He heard the name whispered among the struggling artists who gathered sometimes for cheap sake and shared commiseration. Master Ido. A recluse, a former monk perhaps, living in a decaying temple on the city's edge, known not for fortune-telling, but for an unsettling wisdom, an ability to cut through illusion with a few quiet words. They spoke of him with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Some claimed he could see into a man's soul, others dismissed him as an eccentric trading in riddles. For Kenji, drowning in his creative impotence, the name sparked a desperate hope, a sage, an insight, anything to break this suffocating deadlock. He envisioned Edo providing a key, a sudden revelation that would unlock the flow of ink and inspiration. He announced his intention to Hana one morning, pushing aside his untouched breakfast. "I will visit Master Edo today," he stated, his voice carrying a brittle edge of resolve. Hana paused, her hand hovering over the teapot. "Edo-sama? They say he lives far out near the western hills. Is it wise, Kenji-san? What can such a man offer an artist?" Her concern was gentle, laced with the unspoken fear of yet another distraction, another drain on their dwindling resources. "Wisdom. Hana," Kenji snapped, impatience flaring. "Insight. Something you wouldn't understand." He regretted the harshness instantly, seeing the flicker of hurt in her eyes, but the pull of this potential solution was too strong. He pushed back his chair, avoiding her gaze. "I need clarity." He left without another word, Hana watching his retreating back, the familiar ache of helplessness tightening in her chest. She tidied the breakfast things, her movements precise, automatic, a small ritual against the encroaching chaos of her husband's mind. She prayed silently at the small kamidana, not for masterpieces, but for peace, for the return of the man she had married. Kenji walked briskly, the city's energy a jarring contrast to his inner turmoil. He pushed through crowds near Sanjo Bridge, ignoring the vendors, the cries, the nascent signs of Western fashion mingling with traditional robes. His focus was narrowed, fixed on the distant hills, on the promise of Ido's wisdom. The journey was longer than he anticipated, leading him away from the familiar bustle into quieter lanes, then onto a winding path shaded by ancient cryptomeria. Finally, he reached it. Not quite a temple, more a large, secluded residence built in an older style, weathered wood blending into the surrounding forest. A profound silence enveloped the place, broken only by the chirping of unseen birds and the distant gurgle of a hidden stream. It felt detached, suspended in time. An elderly servant, moving with quiet deference, admitted him after a moment's hesitation, leading him through cool, dim corridors to a sparsely furnished room overlooking a meticulously raked gravel garden. Master Ido sat facing the garden, perfectly still. He was thinner than Kenji expected, almost frail, dressed in simple dark robes. But his eyes, when he turned them slowly towards Kenji, were startlingly sharp, missing nothing. There was no warmth in them, only a calm, penetrating awareness. Kenji bowed low, suddenly intimidated. He launched into his explanation, the words tumbling out in a rush, his dedication to ukiyo-e, the struggle against changing times, the frustrating block, the burning desire to capture not just surface beauty, but the mono-no-aware, the poignant awareness of impermanence, the very soul of fleeting moments. He launched into his explanation, the words tumbling out in a rush, his dedication to ukiyo-e, the struggle against changing times, the frustrating block, the burning desire to capture not just surface beauty, but the mono-no-aware. He spoke of his quest for the perfect image, the ultimate expression, his voice rising with passion, bordering on desperation. Ido listened without interruption, his gaze steady, unwavering. When Kenji finally fell silent, breathless, the old man remained quiet for a long moment, studying him. The silence stretched, amplifying Kenji's unease. "You chase shadows," Ido said at last, his voice soft but resonant, filling the quiet room. "You seek to grasp the reflection on the water. The harder you clutch, the more it dissolves." He paused, his eyes seeming to look past Kenji, into the depths of his obsession. "This perfect beauty you crave. It is a dangerous mirror. To capture it, truly capture it, is to risk shattering the vessel that holds it. Or," his gaze sharpened slightly, meeting Kenji's, "to shatter other vessels you hold dear, perhaps without noticing." The words hung in the air, cryptic, unsettling. Kenji felt a prickle of resentment mixed with fear. Was this the profound insight? Abstract warnings? Philosophical riddles? He wanted a technique, a direction, not metaphors about water and mirrors. He bowed again, murmuring his thanks, feeling vaguely cheated, yet also disturbed in a way he couldn't define. As the servant showed him out, guiding him back towards the entrance path that skirted the edge of the inner garden, Kenji's gaze snagged on a figure standing near a cluster of bamboo. A young woman, perhaps early 20s, was tending to moss near a stone lantern. She wore the simple dark clothing of an attendant, her hair pulled back severely. But as she looked up, startled by his presence, Kenji felt a physical jolt, as if struck by lightning. It wasn't conventional beauty, not the powdered perfection of a Gion Geiko. It was something else, a startling asymmetry in her features, eyes that held both a deep innocence and an unnerving ancient stillness, a fragility in the line of her neck that spoke directly to the ephemeral essence he had been blindly chasing. The way the dappled sunlight caught the curve of her cheek seemed, for a breathtaking instant, to hold the entire meaning of transient beauty he had failed to capture in countless prints. Yumi. The servant murmured her name as they passed, a simple introduction Kenji barely registered consciously. His mind had seized upon the image. This was it. Not a technique, not a philosophy, but a face, a presence. Ido's warning evaporated like morning mist. The reflection on the water had suddenly taken form, and he knew, with the absolute certainty of obsession, that he had to possess it, fix it onto wood and paper, before it vanished forever. The vessel, shattered or not, no longer mattered. The image of Yumi burned behind Kenji's eyelids. He returned home in a daze, the city streets a blur. Hana greeted him with anxious hope, searching his face for signs of peace or breakthrough. She saw only a new, feverish light in his eyes that alarmed her more than his previous frustration. "Did Ido-sama offer guidance?" she asked softly. "Guidance?" "Yes," Kenji lied, his voice distant. He showed me a new path. He retreated immediately to his workspace, unrolling fresh paper, grinding ink with renewed, frantic energy. But the images that flowed from his brush were not the landscapes or historical scenes he usually attempted. They were fragments, the curve of an eye, the line of a jaw, the fall of light on dark hair. Sketches of Yumi, drawn from the single, searing memory. His creative block was gone, replaced by a consuming fixation. He worked with a speed that astonished Hana, but the work remained hidden, turned away whenever she entered the room. He began making excuses to leave the house at odd hours, vague mentions of seeking inspiration by the river or observing temple architecture. In reality, he found himself drawn back towards the western hills, not daring to approach Ido's residence directly, but lingering on nearby paths, hoping for another glimpse of Yumi. He'd catch sight of her occasionally, a fleeting figure in the distance, each sighting fueling the fire, tightening the knot of his obsession. He filled sketchbooks with her image, variations on a theme, trying to capture that elusive quality, that blend of innocence and profound stillness. He knew on some level the madness of it. Ido's warning echoed faintly in the back of his mind, shattering the vessel. He was neglecting Hana more than ever, their conversations dwindling to brief necessities. He ate little, slept less, pouring all his energy into the secret sketches. Guilt flickered, but was instantly extinguished by the thrill of the chase, the artistic certainty that he was on the verge of his masterpiece. Yet, the sketches, though numerous, still felt incomplete. He hadn't captured the soul of the image. A nagging fear began to grow alongside the obsession. What if Ado knew? The old man's eyes seemed to see everything. What if his cryptic warnings were more specific than Kenji had realized? The thought that his fixation might be discovered exposed brought a cold sweat to his brow. He needed reassurance, or perhaps another veiled warning he could twist to his purpose. Driven by this volatile mix of artistic fervor and rising anxiety, he decided to return to Master Ido. He journeyed back to the secluded residence, his heart pounding. This time, he didn't speak of artistic blocks. He presented himself as a seeker grappling with a profound, potentially dangerous inspiration. "Master," he began, keeping his gaze lowered, "the path you hinted at, I believe I have glimpsed its destination. An image of profound beauty, but perhaps perilous. If I pursue it fully, dedicate myself to capturing this perfect form, will it lead to ruin? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Will my pursuit become known to those who might misunderstand? He avoided mentioning Yumi directly, cloaking his specific obsession in artistic generalization, hoping Ido would offer some ambiguous reassurance he could interpret favorably. Master Ido regarded him with the same unnerving stillness. Perhaps he saw through the careful phrasing, perhaps he sensed the specific human object of Kenji's artistic lust, or perhaps he simply responded to the raw edge of obsession vibrating beneath the polite words. He did not offer ambiguity. "The shadow you chase," Ido said, his voice low and sharp, devoid of its earlier philosophical detachment, "now stands at the precipice. Danger gathers around it, Kenji-san. Consequences are closing in, like storm clouds over the mountains. Withdraw. Withdraw immediately before the lightning strikes. Cling to this illusion any longer, and you invite disaster not only upon yourself, but upon the object of your fixation. Its exposure is imminent, if you persist." The words struck Kenji like a physical blow. Exposure is imminent. Danger gathers. Ado knew. He somehow knew about Yumi, about the sketches, about the secret visits. The master's perceived omniscience terrified him far more than any abstract warning about shattered vessels. The artistic drive vanished, replaced by pure animal panic. Ruin wasn't just a metaphor. It was Ido predicting his discovery, his shame, perhaps even some unknown retribution. He stammered his thanks, bowed hastily, and fled the residence, stumbling back down the path towards the city. He didn't look back. The image of Yumi, moments before so luminous and essential, now seemed tainted with threat. He saw her not as inspiration, but as the source of his potential downfall. The fear was absolute, eclipsing everything else. He arrived home pale and trembling. Hana, startled by his state, rushed towards him. "Kenji-san, what happened? Are you unwell?" "Fine," he choked out, pushing past her. "I am fine. Just tired." He went straight to his workspace, but not to draw. With shaking hands, he gathered the countless sketches of Yumi, the fragments, the near portraits, the obsessive attempts to capture her essence. He took them out to the small, neglected back garden where Hana tried to grow herbs. There, in the damp evening air, he built a small fire and fed the drawings to the flames, watching the images curl, blacken, and dissolve into ash. He felt a wrenching sense of loss, but the fear was stronger. He had to erase her, exorcise her from his mind, sever the connection before Eido's prophecy could fulfill itself. But the fire consumed more than just the paper. It burned away his inspiration, his drive, the very core of his artistic impulse. When he returned inside, the scent of smoke clinging to him, and tried to pick up a carving tool the next day, his hand refused to obey. He stared at the blank woodblock, his mind a void. The wellspring of his art, already troubled, had run completely dry. The fear that had driven him to destroy his obsession now manifested as a profound creative impotence, a paralysis more terrifying than the earlier block. He was empty. Current part characters, 3,286. Total characters, 7,092. Days bled into weeks, then months. Kenji existed in a grey limbo. He rarely left the house, spending hours staring blankly at the walls or the dormant tools of his abandoned craft. The feverish energy was gone, replaced by a heavy lethargy, a silence that pressed down on the small house like a physical weight. He spoke little, ate mechanically, and avoided Hana's increasingly anxious gaze. The sharp angles of his face grew more pronounced, his robes hung loosely on his frame. He was a ghost in his own home, haunted by the art he could no longer create, and the fear that still lingered like a chill in his bones. Hana watched his decline with a desperation that clawed at her insides. This was worse than the obsessive work, worse than the neglect. That man had been alive, albeit consumed. This man was fading, withdrawing into a place she couldn't reach. The silence in the house became unbearable, amplifying the whispers she imagined from neighbours, the unspoken pity in the eyes of the rice merchant. Her shame grew. Shame for her husband's failure, shame for her inability to help him, shame for the barrenness of their life together. She tried everything she could think of. She prepared his favourite foods, which he barely touched. She brought home new brushes, expensive paper, hoping to tempt him. She spoke of spring festivals, of the beauty of the changing seasons, trying to rekindle a spark. Nothing worked. He remained lost in his internal fog. Her patience, worn thin over years of neglect, finally frayed. The image of Kenji, vibrant and passionate, even in his obsession, warred with the hollow shell he had become. She couldn't bear it. She decided, with a fierce, quiet determination born of love and despair, that she had to reignite his artistic spirit. She believed, perhaps foolishly, that his art was his life force. If she could restore the one, she could restore the other, and perhaps salvage something of their shared future. Remembering fragmented whispers from her grandmother about potent remedies for profound listlessness, for spirits trapped in shadow, she began to make discreet inquiries. She spoke to older women at the neighbourhood shrine, visited herbalists in dusty backstreet shops, hinting vaguely at a relative suffering from a deep creative malaise. Most offered simple teas or incense, ineffective platitudes. But one name surfaced, spoken in hushed tones, an apothecary hidden away in a less reputable district, known for dealing in rare and powerful substances, ingredients that skirted the edges of legality and safety. They said he catered to those seeking extreme solutions, actors wanting heightened senses, writers chasing elusive muses, desperate souls looking for shortcuts to transcendence or oblivion. Fear warred with Hana's resolve, but the image of Kenji's vacant eyes spurred her on. She found the shop tucked between a pawnbroker and a dimly lit tavern. The air inside was thick with the cloying scent of exotic herbs and minerals. The apothecary, a small man with eyes that seemed to absorb the light, listened to her hesitant explanation of a husband whose creative fire had died. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Ah!" the apothecary murmured, reaching under his counter. The spirit's slumber, a difficult affliction. He produced a small, tightly wrapped packet of dark paper. There are substances, catalysts, that can awaken what sleeps, force open the mind's eye. He placed the packet on the counter. It seemed heavy for its size. "Dragon's breath powder," he whispered, the name itself a warning. "Used by monks in ancient times, they say, to achieve visions, or by artists seeking intensity." Hana stared at the packet, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her purse. "Is it safe?" The apothecary offered a thin, humourless smile. "Safe? It awakens the spirit, madam. What the awakened spirit does then, that is beyond the powder's control. It unlocks the mind, but the door can swing both ways. The price reflects the risk." The price was exorbitant, nearly all that remained of their savings. But Hana didn't hesitate. She paid, took the packet, and hurried away, clutching it tightly, the apothecary's ambiguous warning echoing in her ears. She felt a surge of desperate hope mixed with a profound sense of dread. She was meddling with forces she didn't understand, guided only by love and the unbearable weight of Kenji's emptiness. That evening, she approached Kenji as he sat staring at the rain lashing against the shoji screen. She knelt beside him, holding out the packet. "Kenji-san," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I found something. They say it can help, to clear the fog, to bring back the fire." He looked at the packet, then at her face, seeing perhaps for the first time in months the depth of her desperation, the reflection of his own despair. He had nothing left to lose. His fear of Ido's prophecy had led him to this wasteland. Perhaps this unknown powder was the only way back. He took the packet with a resigned sigh. Hana explained the apothecary's instructions, a minuscule amount, mixed with warm water, taken on an empty stomach. He prepared it himself, his movements slow, deliberate. He drank the mixture quickly, the taste bitter, metallic. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a warmth began to spread through him, followed by a tingling sensation, a sharpening of the senses. The grey fog in his mind began to recede, replaced by a startling clarity. Images flooded his consciousness, not just of Yumi, but of everything. Colours brighter, sounds sharper, emotions amplified to an almost unbearable intensity. The dormant artist within him surged awake, roaring like a furnace. He scrambled towards his workspace, knocking over a stool in his haste. "Ink!" he gasped, his eyes blazing with an unnatural light. "Paper! Wood!" Hana rushed to obey, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and elation. The change was instantaneous, terrifyingly complete. Kenji seized a block of wood and began carving with a speed and ferocity she had never witnessed. Chips flew, the blade blurring in his hands. He worked without pause, ignoring her pleas to rest, to eat. Night turned into day, and day into night again. He was possessed. The small house filled with the frantic energy of his creation. He moved like a whirlwind, grinding ink, carving blocks, pulling prints with feverish intensity. The images that emerged were unlike anything he had done before. They were powerful, disturbing, imbued with the raw, amplified emotions surging through him. Landscapes twisted into expressions of inner turmoil, traditional motifs warped into symbols of beauty and decay. The lines were sharp, almost violent, the colours unnaturally vibrant. Hana watched, trapped between hope and horror. This was the fire she had wanted, but it was burning too hot, consuming him from within. His face grew gaunt, his eyes sunken but blazing. A dry cough began to rack his body, but he ignored it, driven by the relentless creative storm unleashed by the dragon's breath powder. He seemed to be channeling years of frustration, obsession and fear onto the wood and paper. He worked for 3 days and 3 nights without stopping, fueled by the powder and his own life force. Hana tried to force sips of water or broth upon him, but he waved her away impatiently. He was approaching the culmination, the final piece, the one that would contain everything. On the 3rd night, under the flickering lamplight, he began the final print. It was a complex composition, blending elements he had chased for so long. At its centre was a face, unmistakably Yumi's in its unique structure, but transformed, etherealized, her expression holding both infinite sadness and serene detachment. Around her swirled chaotic patterns, hints of dying blossoms, fractured reflections, the embodiment of mono-no-aware pushed to its extreme. It was terrifyingly beautiful, a masterpiece born of obsession and poison. He worked with painstaking precision now, the earlier frenzy replaced by an almost trance-like focus. Each line carved, each colour applied, seemed to drain something vital from him. Hana watched, holding her breath, sensing the end approaching. The air crackled with tension. Finally, he pulled the last print from the block. He held it up, his hands shaking violently now. His breath came in ragged gasps. He stared at the image, a look of terrible, triumphant understanding dawning in his eyes. "I see it," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. A violent cough seized him, and he crumpled forward, clutching his chest. Dark blood bloomed on his lips. He collapsed onto the scattered prints, the final masterpiece fluttering from his grasp. Hana screamed, rushing to his side. "Kenji-san! Kenji!" She lifted his head, but his eyes were already glazing over. The fire was extinguished, leaving only fragile, cooling embers. He was gone. The silence that descended was absolute, deafening. Hana knelt amidst the debris of his final fatal creation, the scent of ink and blood mingling in the air. Her tears fell onto the stark black lines of the print beside her, Yumi's haunting face staring back, a testament to Kenji's achieved vision. She saw the small, now empty packet of dragon's breath powder lying near his outstretched hand. Ido's words returned with chilling clarity. Reviving the dead might cause the living to die. She had desperately sought to revive his dead art, his slumbering spirit, and in doing so she had killed the living man. The bitter, inescapable irony crushed her. She had gotten what she wished for, his passion returned, his masterpiece created, and the price was everything. Alone in the silent house, surrounded by the terrifying beauty of his final works, Hana's heartbroken sobs were the only sound left in Kenji's floating world. The dawn painted Kyoto in soft shades of grey and rose, light filtering through the paper screens, illuminating the scene of tragic creation. Hana remained kneeling, motionless, the initial storm of grief having subsided into a numb shock. Kenji's body lay still beside her, a stark contrast to the frenetic energy that had consumed him just hours before. His final masterpiece lay face up on the floor, Yumi's eyes seeming to follow Hana with an expression of profound, unknowable sorrow. The dragon's breath powder, the catalyst for this brief, brilliant inferno and its devastating conclusion, seemed to mock her from where it lay discarded. She had sought a cure, a way to reclaim her husband from the grey fog, and had instead pushed him over the edge into oblivion. The apothecary's warning, "The door can swing both ways," echoed with cruel precision. The door had opened onto a vision Kenji had chased his entire life, but it had swung shut behind him, trapping him forever on the other side. She thought of Master Ido, his calm, penetrating gaze, his cryptic pronouncements. Had he foreseen this exact end? Was his warning about the object of fixation being in peril not about Yumi's exposure, but about Kenji himself, the vessel inevitably shattered by the intensity he pursued? The irony was a physical ache in her chest. Kenji had fled from one perceived danger, only to have her, in her desperate love, lead him directly into another, fatal one. Fate, or perhaps just the relentless consequence of human obsession and desperation, had woven its inescapable pattern. Slowly, stiffly, Hana rose. The house felt vast and empty. The tools of Kenji's art lay scattered, silent witnesses. The prints, vibrant and disturbing, seemed to pulse with the last echoes of his life force. They were his legacy, born of torment, obsession, and ultimately death. Would the world see the genius in them, or only the madness? And what would become of her, the woman left behind with the ashes and the art? She walked to the shoji screen and slid it open, letting the cool morning air flood the room. Kyoto was waking up, the sounds of the city a distant murmur. Life went on, indifferent to the small, devastating tragedy that had unfolded in this quiet house. She looked down at her own hands, ink-stained from trying to help him in his final hours. She had been complicit, an unwitting agent of the Feinji had tried, futilely, to escape. There were practical